Hellfire on Joux 9. The sky above Joux 9 boiled with plasma fire sheets of molten death streaking between the black clouds, like angry gods carving scars across the heavens. The atmosphere shimmered not with life, but with radioactive heat, the air thick with scorched metal, and the stink of ozone. What little wind stirred was laced with ash. The world itself seemed to burn from the inside out. Joux 9 had once been a mineral-rich colony, a quiet place of trade and terraforming. Now it was a graveyard of failed resistance. Entire mountain ranges lay split open by kinetic strikes. Rivers had boiled into nothingness. Craters smoked like open wounds in the earth. Amid this broken wasteland, the Qatar stood hulking cold-blooded titans from a warrior caste that ruled half a quadrant. They were reptilian armored in living suits that flexed and pulsed with every movement. Their biology and technology were one and the same. 8 feet tall on average, they moved with the grace of predators and the discipline of zealots. Their language was a chorus of roars and trills, but in any tongue their intent was always understood. Conquest through annihilation. They had never known defeat. The galaxy trembled at the sound of their war drums. The Qatar Empire had lasted 5 centuries, crushed in 5 weeks. The very republic was shattered in orbit before their ambassadors could even send a surrender. The Zuran fleets, once called unbreakable, were split down their keels and left to drift as frozen tombs. Victory was the Qatar's birthright. So when they landed on Joux 9, they expected the same compliance collapse conquest. Instead, they got Earth's 3rd division. The dropship fell from the sky like a dead star, engines snarling as they cut through layers of toxic storm cloud. Its plating was old, battered, pocked with scars from a dozen dead planets. No insignia, no banners, just the brutal silence of steel ready to open. When the hatch groaned open, Captain Elias Grant stepped out. No speech, no salutes, just boots hitting blackened dirt. He was tall, but not in the way the Qatar were. His armor wasn't elegant. It was utilitarian, patched with makeshift repairs, burn marks, and kinetic scarring. A jagged line split his left cheek, a wound from a war, not even cataloged in the Universal Codex. His eyes were pale, steady, and unfazed. Behind him came the rest of 3rd Division, silent ghosts in burnished armor, moving like smoke. They didn't need to announce themselves. The ground knew. The air shivered, the ashes remembered. Sergeant Lin's voice crackled through the internal comms, calm and focused. 10 clicks northwest. High thermal bloom looks like heavy artillery. Grant didn't blink. Protocol Delta 2-man teams. Show them hell. No one responded. They didn't need to. Orders were simply confirmations of what everyone already knew they were going to do. The squad scattered into the dead terrain, slipping through slag piles, broken hulls of alien war machines, and rivers of cooling glass. They moved with intent, precision, a choreography honed not by training manuals but by trauma. No music swelled, no flags unfurled, just the grim echo of boots and breathing beneath helmets. The Qatar didn't see them coming, too busy lining up another overwhelming offensive, too confident in their record, too blind to the ghosts walking in their midst. But Grant had seen this before on Earth during the fall of Tokyo arcology, in the methane storms of Titan, in the starvation riots of the Africa dust zones. He didn't fear overwhelming odds, he understood them. The enemy had numbers, strength, prestige, but his team, they had memory, they had pain, and on Joux 9, pain was a better weapon than plasma. First blood. The first explosion hit like a hammer from the gods. A flash of light followed by a thunderclap that rolled across the scorched plains and bounced off shattered cliff faces. A Qatar artillery emplacement, a sleek, muscular monstrosity of biotech and plasma conduits, erupted into a spray of molten armor and dismembered limbs. The ground shook, the sky screamed, and then came the humans. They didn't arrive like heroes. They didn't shout or charge in glorious unison. They emerged like phantoms darting between wreckage and smoke, their rifles whispering death with every pull of the trigger. Where the Qatar moved in disciplined lines, Earth's warriors flowed like water, finding paths in terrain the enemy had dismissed as irrelevant. Mud pits, slag valleys, broken hulls of dead tanks. Every inch of ruin was a weapon in their hands. Private Camilla Mendes was the first to draw blood. She was young, barely 20, but her eyes had the quiet rage of someone who'd survived far too much. Far too soon, born in the ruins of a refugee camp during the freshwater wars, she'd learned early how to hide, how to fight, and how to bury the dead without crying. She hit the front line with a plasma scattergun screaming through the smoke, her boots sliding on ash. 3 Qatar soldiers turned toward the sound, then fell torn apart by the brute force of her weapon. She didn't stop. She rolled behind cover, reloaded, then popped up again and sent more bodies to the dust. To her, this battlefield wasn't terrifying, it was familiar. The Qatar weren't used to this. They're smaller than we expected. One commander barked through a translator, note voice thick with disbelief, but fast unpredictable. Unpredictable was one word for it. Suicidal was another. The humans didn't wait for orders. They improvised, adapted twisted chaos into strategy. They flanked from impossible angles. One squad set up a sniper nest inside the hollow of a wrecked transport. Another rerouted coolant lines from an enemy tank into a trap that flash froze 3 advancing Qatar soldiers mid-step. Captain Grant fought at the center, quiet and efficient, like a man performing maintenance rather than engaging in war. He ducked under a swinging Qatar blade, rolled forward into the creature's blind spot, and shoved a magnetic charge under its chest plate. He dove clear. Boom! The creature collapsed in a heap of fire and black smoke. Grant stood brushing ash off his armor and muttered to no one, "You think this is war?" He looked down at the charred corpse. "Try losing your hometown to orbital fire and crawling through the rubble to bury your mother." That was the difference. To the Qatar, war was honor, discipline, rank, protocol. To humans, war was survival. Ugly, dirty, personal. The Qatar fought for medals and legacy. Earth's warriors fought because the alternative was extinction. By nightfall, the battlefield had shifted. The Qatar, expecting to hold the ridge until reinforcements arrived, had pulled back nearly a full mile. Their dead littered the field. Massive armored bodies twisted in poses of disbelief and horror. Their war machines lay silent, either hijacked or hollowed out from within. Sergeant Lin knelt over the body of a fallen enemy, scanning its embedded tech systems. "They're running predictive simulations on our tactics," she said, "trying to guess our next moves." Mendes, crouched nearby, laughed bitterly. "Good luck with that. I can't even predict my own moves." They didn't celebrate. There was nothing to celebrate. They sat in the dirt, armor scorched, faces blackened. They chewed nutrient paste and drank recycled water. No one complained. No one needed to. Captain Grant looked across the small camp, his eyes resting on each of them in turn, scarred, battered, but alive. "We're not heroes," he said, voice low. "We're just used to pain." Above them, the sky rumbled. But the 3rd Division didn't flinch. They'd fought in worse. Catharix, shadows of war. The Qatar were not used to retreat. It was a concept buried deep beneath layers of pride and tradition. Yet here they were falling back from a battlefield they had expected to conquer in hours. And worse, they weren't retreating from superior numbers or overwhelming firepower. They were retreating from ghosts, from humans. The War Council convened in a massive obsidian dome far behind the front lines. Its walls pulsed with dim bow-light veins, a sign of authority and age. Inside, a dozen warlords shouted over each other. Tactical holomaps flickering with red zones where Earth's 3rd Division had broken through. "This is not a military force," one roared. "They don't follow formations, they don't hold ranks, they don't even use standard tactics. They are animals," spat another, "undisciplined savages. We should have crushed them in the first hour." Commander Vakru said nothing at first. He stood at the edge of the table, arms crossed, clawed fingers twitching. His gaze lingered on the holomap where another artillery nest had just gone dark. "Animals," he repeated, voice quiet. "Animals don't kill elite berserkers with scavenged tech and homemade bombs." Silence. Then he made the call. "Deploy the Catharix." A murmur rippled through the room. The Catharix weren't soldiers. They were exterminators. Genetically altered, chemically stabilized, psychologically reprogrammed for total obedience. Their weapons were illegal in most of the galaxy. Their purpose was not victory. It was eradication. The humans had no idea what was coming. Night fell fast on Joux 9, twin moons casting red light over the jagged terrain. The temporary camp was quiet. Too quiet, and Mendy sat cross-legged by a half-cracked crate, rigging motion sensors to a pile of broken Qatar armor. She muttered in Spanish under her breath, fingers working with calm familiarity. Grant watched her from nearby, arms folded. "You always this quiet before a storm?" She didn't look up. "Only when I know the storm's not ending well for them." Lynn perched on a rusted beam with a sniper scope trained on the hills. "They're out there, watching. They're taunting us," someone muttered. Grant shook his head. "No, they're warning us." Then came the drums, low, deep, rhythmic. The kind that didn't echo, they rumbled. The kind that didn't mark a march, but a hunt. The Catharix didn't announce their charge. They simply appeared, 12 feet tall. Their armor shimmered in and out of visibility, cloaking tech integrated into their skin. Plasma axes in both hands, movements fluid, inhuman like shadows given form. They didn't scream, didn't roar. They came with surgical silence and cut through Earth's perimeter like it wasn't there. Sergeant Resner was the first to engage. He never saw the second attacker coming. The Cathrex struck from 3 angles at once, one from above, one from the flank, one through the goddamn dirt. Grant dragged Resner to cover just before a 4th emerged, blade crackling with plasma. There was no time for orders. Grant met the enemy head-on, slamming into its chest and driving his knife up beneath its jaw. The blade sparked against bone and bit deep. The creature spasmed and collapsed, but another was already advancing. "Backlines breached," Lynn shouted over the comms. "They're adapting, they're learning us." Grant didn't hesitate. "Then stop giving them patterns. Break formation. Go feral." That changed everything. The squad scattered not in fear, but in design. They moved erratically without ranks or rhythm. It was chaos. Beautiful, vicious chaos. One soldier dove under a Cathrex strike, only to reappear on its back, driving a spike into its spine. Another set off an improvised mine built from 2 grenades and a cracked energy core. Even Mendes joined the madness, luring a Cathrex into a makeshift pit trap rigged with shock coils. The explosion lit the night in blue. "They're better trained," Grant muttered, blocking a swing and countering with a plasma torch to the knee. "But they're too rigid." The Cathrex began to fall, not because they were weaker, but because they couldn't predict madness. The final blow came from Lynn, dropping the last berserker with a railgun shot that tore through 3 inches of cloaked armor and left a smoking hole where its eye used to be. Silence fell. The battlefield was a graveyard of shattered metal and torn flesh. The humans didn't cheer. They didn't speak. They just stood bloodied and breathing. Was that their best? Resner coughed from where he lay, 2 fingers missing. Grant didn't smile. "If it was," he said, "then they've got a real problem." Psychological warfare. The Cathrex were dead, and the battlefield was quiet again. But not with peace. It was the quiet of a predator who just tasted blood and liked it. At dawn, the 3rd Division moved like phantoms, dirty, bloodied, half-limping phantoms. They didn't rebuild defenses, they didn't dig trenches or wait for orders. They vanished into the broken terrain, one squad at a time. Grant called it going dark. No more comms, no more broadcasts. From that moment on, they would speak only one language: pain. The Qatar didn't understand what was happening. Scouts reported abandoned zones, empty encampments, no signals, no command structures. But everywhere they walked, something felt wrong. A ridge they'd secured the day before was suddenly empty, except for one rusted helmet, freshly placed in the center, staring up at the sky with hollow sockets. A patrol found an old bunker rigged with whisper bombs, devices that emitted low-frequency vibrations tuned to the neurological pain centers of Qatar biology. When one of the troopers triggered it, he screamed for 6 minutes straight. No physical damage, just the illusion of pain. But it stuck. Then came the audio loops recordings of the last screams of fallen Cathrex, spliced and warped broadcast through salvaged drones flying lazy circles above Qatar camps. They heard their dead beg for help in voices twisted by static. They stopped sleeping. Mendes worked through the night building ghost kits, cheap, dirty little boxes made from scavenged circuit boards and melted down comms arrays. Each one programmed to cycle through old Earth nursery rhymes, slowed to a crawl mixed with battlefield screams and the hissing sound of plasma leaking. She stuffed them inside gutted corpses, in tree trunks, in piles of discarded armor. They weren't weapons, they were hauntings. Resner joined in, his voice shredded from blood loss and smoke. He began recording himself, reading off the names of every fallen human from Joux 9. Not shouting, just whispering, soft, intimate. He transmitted the names into enemy channels randomly. At midnight, the Qatar couldn't trace the source, but they heard the whispers in their helmets, and they began to crack. One patrol stumbled across what looked like a human child. "Small blood, a decreasing alone." They hesitated. As they approached, the child raised its head and smiled. Boom! Tripwire mine. 3 dead. 2 more blinded. The child was a puppet rigged to a motion-activated charge. "This is savagery," growled one Qatar lieutenant, limping back to base. "They are beneath us." Commander Vakru slammed his clawed fist into the table hard enough to crack the bowlight. Then why, he growled, "Are they winning?" Underground, deep in a forgotten mineshaft system beneath the Qatar command dome, Grant crouched over a dirty metal plate, a map scratched into it with blood and soot. The humans had tunneled for days with their bare hands when they had to, with salvaged plasma cutters and broken mining bots when they didn't. They had clawed their way under the Qatar base. "They're unraveling," he told Lynn, who stood nearby holding a flickering torch. "They think honor wins wars. We know different. We know what it takes." She nodded, her face pale, her uniform soaked with sweat. "We've got charges prepped." Grant didn't look up. "Not yet. Let them fester." Let the doubt rot them from the inside. That's how you win a war, by outlasting hell. At Qatar High Command, another officer shot himself in the head. No explanation, just plasma and silence. Supplies had been poisoned, water filters compromised. Some warriors had started hallucinating, seeing red-eyed humans walking through walls, emerging from flame, untouched by bullets. None of it was real. But it didn't matter. Fear had taken root. And Earth had taught its children how to cultivate fear. Lynn stitched her own wound with alien staples. Mendes had 3 cracked ribs and a dislocated shoulder. Reznor coughed blood with every breath. No one stopped fighting, because they weren't fighting for victory. They were fighting to ruin the Qatar's soul. One night during an acid rainstorm, a single human walked into the Qatar base. No armor, no weapons. It was Lynn. Her uniform was shredded skin, pale and bleeding. She staggered forward, hands raised, and collapsed at the guard's feet. They dragged her inside, locked her in restraints. She didn't resist. She smiled. "Now you'll see," she whispered, "what it's like when the monsters don't leave." Commander Vakru stood over her, fists clenched. "You're just one soldier. You already lost," she murmured. Coughing blood, "You just haven't collapsed yet." Somewhere beneath their feet, 13 charges hummed quietly in the dark. Not an explosion, not yet. Just the promise of one. Beneath the earth, the ground trembled with ghosts, not the supernatural kind, something worse. The kind built from hatred, exhaustion, and the sheer will not to die quietly. Underneath the Qatar Command Dome, a sprawling obsidian fortress surrounded by burned-out sentry towers and acidic mist, Earth's 3rd Division was already there. They had been for days, tunneling, planning, waiting. The tunnels they used were remnants from a long-forgotten mining colony deemed too unstable by Qatar engineers to be of value. But Earth's soldiers were bred in collapse. They knew how to move through broken spaces, how to crawl in the dark with bloodied fingers and silent breath. They didn't need safety, they needed access. They dug with plasma cutters, repurposed alien tech, and whatever limbs still worked. Mendes, held together by gauze painkillers and sheer spite, mapped structural weaknesses with hacked Qatar seismic software. Lynn, leg wounds stitched with wire, carried charges in both arms while dragging a rope behind her. Reznor couldn't even stand without help, coughing blood with every breath, but he kept pressing detonators into mud, muttering curses like prayers. No one asked for a medic. There weren't any left. Grant oversaw everything from the central shaft leaning over their makeshift war table, scratched into an old bulkhead with a combat knife. The map was crude blood dust and torn cloth. But it was enough. He looked at Mendes' final count. 13 charges, she said, placed along structural load points. "We drop this place all at once. They get buried alive." Grant nodded, jaw clenched. "Any chance we make it out?" She hesitated. "Maybe," which meant no. Reznor spat red onto the dirt. "If I die, I want one of them to see my face when it happens." Grant gave him a glance, half amusement, half agreement. They weren't planning a clean win. They were planning a message. Above ground, the Qatar were fracturing. Their communications had broken down completely. The whisper bombs scrambled command signals. Their soldiers were hallucinating. Some had started refusing orders. A few had turned on each other. One warlord fled into the wastes, claiming to see humans with fire in their eyes and knives in their shadows. No one had seen Earth soldiers in hours. That was the plan. Vakru paced the central chamber like a caged beast, his claws leaving gouges in the polished floor. Lynn hung from a metal frame in the centered arms, stretched blood crusted on her lips, eyes half-lidded with exhaustion. But she still smiled. "You think this is the end?" Vakru snarled, stepping closer. "It's not." Lynn didn't answer. Didn't have to. Below them, Grant held the detonator in his hand. The handle was wrapped in duct tape. Burned fingerprints marked its surface. There was no drama to it, no speech, just the weight of finality. He looked around at what was left of his team. 5 soldiers, all wounded, all filthy, all ready. They crouched in silence, listening. Not just for orders, but for the Earth, because it too had started to groan. The Qatar had begun moving elite troops toward the dome reinforcements, desperate and enraged. But none of them realized they were walking over a death trap. Mendes leaned against the tunnel wall, one arm wrapped in synth fiber. "I placed the failsafe," she said. "Good," Grant replied, not looking up. Lynn had done her job. Now it was their turn. At high noon, the Qatar began evacuating. Their scanners showed thermal anomalies, but nothing concrete. Their war drums were silent. Their soldiers whispered in corridors, walking past each other like ghosts. The fortress had become a tomb waiting for the lid to slam shut. And deep beneath it, Earth's warriors crouched surrounded by damp rock, shivering air and silence so heavy it felt like gravity. "We hit now," Mendes asked. Grant waited. 1 heartbeat. 2. Then he whispered, "No, let them rot first." They waited 2 more hours. Above, the acid rain started again, hissing on steel, on skin, on alien bone. Grant finally stood. He stared at the ceiling, at the weight of everything above them. Steel stone command rooms, warlords. He pressed the comlink. "Lynn," he said, softly, voice like steel, worn down to the edge. "You still up?" A weak crackle. "Yes." "Brace yourself." He didn't say goodbye. He didn't have to. He pressed the trigger. The charges clicked in unison, soft, perfect, terrifying. The hum that followed wasn't loud, but it was deep. The kind of sound you feel in your spine, the kind that ends things. Above them, the world buckled. Steel beams twisted like vines in a hurricane. The command dome cracked down the center, then folded inward. A second later, the shockwave rolled outward, shattering towers, tossing vehicles like toys, tearing flags into confetti. From the top of the ridge, Lynn, still half-strapped to her restraints, watched it all fall. The ground beneath her tilted violently. She fell backward and hit the dirt with a choked grunt. But she was alive. Beneath her, the enemy was not. The final assault. For a long time, there was only dust. Dust and fire and silence. "Don't bow, I'm so my hands." The kind of silence that came after something permanent had just been broken. Not the tactical hush of a mission finished or a battle paused, but the aching stillness of collapse, of annihilation. The Qatar command dome was gone, not partially, not damaged. Erased, nothing remained but scorched craters, twisted towers lying sideways like snapped bones, and a pillar of smoke rising so high it looked like it was trying to leave the planet itself. The air shimmered with the aftershock of detonation. The surrounding jungle was gone, vaporized by the kinetic force of the charges. And then from the earth, a hand emerged, blackened, bloodied, gripping. Nothing but determination. It was Grant, alive barely. He dragged himself out of the rubble body, shaking armor cracked open at the ribs, one eye swollen shut. Behind him, a second figure clawed into daylight, Reznor missing a leg, his face smeared with soot and blood, his breath coming in wheezes. Then Mendes, wrapped in burned gauze, her hair half singed, still grinning like she'd just heard the galaxy's cruelest joke and loved every syllable of it. More followed. One by one, the last of Earth's 3rd Division rose from the tomb they'd built beneath their enemy. Some crawled, some limped. No one spoke. No one had to. The message was already written in the ash. They didn't cheer. They didn't cry. They just stood at the edge of a grave they had dug and waited to see if the galaxy was paying attention. It was a week passed. No counterattack came. No bombers, no reinforcements, no vengeance from the stars. Instead, Qatar warships began lifting off without orders. Entire battalions went silent. Forward bases were abandoned mid-transmission. Scouts reported confused signals from within the Qatar fleet. Orders, overwritten captains arguing over who had command. They didn't retreat because they'd lost the battle. They retreated because something inside them had broken. The belief in their own invincibility had cracked like the dome. Faith had failed. Grant stood at the top of the highest ridge above the ruins, wrapped in a torn survival blanket. He didn't look like a hero. He looked like a warning. Beside him, Mendes leaned on a steel rod like a crutch. Lynn sat against a shattered crawler, her leg wrapped in scavenged synth tape. Reznor no longer spoke. He just stared at the horizon, twitching every time the wind shifted. They weren't a unit anymore. They were relics, living scars. And the galaxy was watching. The first diplomatic drones arrived on silver wings, smooth ovals blinking with blue lights, broadcasting peace offers in every known language. They dropped food, medical supplies, new comms relays. No one from Earth's 3rd Division responded. They weren't ignoring the drones. They simply didn't care. The drones hovered uncertain, waiting. But Earth's warriors had stopped listening. Then came the analysts, the scholars, the Galactic Accord mediators. They tried to interview the survivors. They wanted answers. How had Earth's primitives shattered the most efficient war machine in the galaxy? What tactics? What technology? What secret weapon? But the soldiers refused to speak, because what could they say? That they'd won by becoming worse monsters than the ones they fought. That they'd laughed while bleeding. That they'd used corpses as decoys and lullabies as psychological weapons. There were no medals, there were no lessons. Only this Earth didn't raise heroes. It raised survivors. A month later, Grant received a message through the new relay. It wasn't from Earth. It was from a small, outer rim species called the Terrell. They had no army, no warships. Just a question. If the Qatar come for us next, will Earth help? Grant stared at the message for a long time, then typed 4 words. Fight, bleed, then speak. No comfort, no promise, just the truth. Because Earth's 3rd Division didn't make promises. They left warnings. And the ruins of Joux 9 whispered that warning across every star system in reach. They thought they knew battle, but Earth's warriors had seen worse. Rise from the ashes. The fires eventually died. The wind took what the flames didn't. Ash drifted like snow, covering wreckage, sealing the past beneath a gray, silent shroud. Trees did not regrow. Birds did not return. Joux 9 remained a scar on the galactic map, permanent, raw, and red. But from beneath it, life limped forward. The survivors of Earth's 3rd Division didn't rebuild. They weren't settlers. They weren't soldiers anymore either. They were something else now. Something too burned to be reshaped, too haunted to go back. They dug shallow graves for the fallen, not for ceremony, for closure. Lynn planted a bent rifle as a marker over a pile of stones. Resner knelt beside her, the stump of his leg wrapped in cloth stitched from torn flags. His eyes had stopped twitching, but he still didn't speak. Not since the dome fell, not since the screams stopped. Mendiz made a fire from Qatar armor and ration packs. She said nothing as she stared into it. The light flickered across her burned cheeks and bandaged hands. Her smile hadn't returned. Grant stood apart from them all. He hadn't slept in 4 days. He didn't eat much either. He just stared at the sky, at the drones still orbiting above, at the occasional supply drop, at the blinking peace signals they ignored. He was listening, waiting for the war to start again, because deep down he knew it hadn't ended. When the first journalist arrived clad in environmental armor, wide-eyed and nervous, he asked Grant a simple question. How did you win? Grant just looked at him and then said without blinking, "We didn't." The story spread anyway. They called them ghost demon survivors from the planet that had bled itself clean just to teach the galaxy a lesson. One story claimed they used enemy bones to carve weapons. Another said Grant had detonated the dome with a smile on his face. Lies maybe. But even lies have power. And in every distant corner of the stars, recruiters quietly erased Earth from their conscription lists. The Accord's military councils updated invasion protocols to account for extreme human unpredictability. An entire species began whispering the name of Earth, not in scorn, but in fear. A week later, Lynn finally spoke. She stood beside Grant at the ridge, watching lightning dance through distant clouds. Acid rain fell beyond the canyon. Not here. Not yet. Do you think we made it worse? She asked. Grant didn't look at her. Worse than what? Than what we were before. He thought for a long time. Then he said, I think Earth made us to survive the worst, so we'd know how to bring it with us. Lynn didn't argue, because she knew he was right. Earth's warning to the galaxy. There was no treaty, no parade, no surrender broadcast across the stars. The Qatar simply vanished. Their fleet stopped responding. Their warships powered down mid-orbit and drifted into silence. Ground units abandoned their posts, left supplies behind, even scuttled their own bases as they fled. Whatever pride had driven them into the war had not survived Joux 9. The galaxy took notice, and it was afraid. Diplomatic channels once used to mock Earth now overflowed with cautionary reports. Academic forums debated the Joux anomaly. Military think tanks circulated black dossiers stamped with the same bold header, "Do not engage Terran forces unprepared." No one spoke of honor, only of damage, of ghosts, of what happens when you push a species too far. Historians tried to piece it together. They played surveillance footage frame by frame, analyzed battlefield patterns, interviewed the drones that were never shot down, but none of them could explain it. Because the truth wasn't in the weapons. It wasn't in the tactics. It was in the eyes of those who crawled out of the dirt bleeding and grinning, who set mines in dead bodies and turned lullabies into weapons. It was in the silence that followed them in the places they didn't go, but haunted anyway. It was in the way they endured. Earth hadn't just fought the Qatar, it had infected them with fear. A year later, on a station orbiting the outer edge of Accord-controlled space, a message was transmitted. Anonymous, short, only 4 words. Don't wake what sleeps. No one traced it. No one replied. But everyone read it. The last known image from Joux 9 came from a probe sent by the Tyrell. A peaceful species with no army, no defense force, just curiosity and fear. The photo showed a ridge. At its peak stood a single figure wrapped in torn armor, back turned to the lens, staring across a valley of ash and ruin. A tattered flag flapped beside him, barely more than a scrap of cloth. No words, no sound, just the shape of a survivor. Watching, waiting, remembering. They thought they knew battle. They thought Earth was weak, primitive, chaotic. But what they learned too late was simple. Earth doesn't conquer, it endures. And when it comes back, it doesn't knock, it burns.